What is up, guys? Welcome back to another Kentucky Derby update live on a Tuesday. That means we're spinning the wheel of death. We'll do that in a second. But before we do, got to introduce Paul Withrow. He's with us today. You know him as Free Beers from the website and the Fantasy League. Paul, good to see you. How you been? It's been a while since you've been on any of the shows.
It's been too long, probably, right? I'm glad to be back. And I don't enjoy anything more than talking Derby. The Derby coming up, and we are not that far away from it. The weather outside has turned nice, so Derby fever is all around us.
Yeah, when you we were texting last night about, hey, I'm going to be on for a shake. And idiots keep claiming these horses. I got to go on every Tuesday morning. That's the last thing I want to do. You said, yeah, I'll come on with you. I was like, oh, that'd be great. There's not many people that would text me that. And I'd be like, okay, you're one of them. So feel very good about that.
I'm glad I'm in that small group then. So
a small group of one. All right, let's go. Let's do the Wheel of Death first. What do you say? Let's just the thing we'll do. So we've got a two-way shake today for Praetor. So Praetor, a horse for Chad Brown. We'll, as you know, Paul, we'll recap him after we get who's got him. But Praetor, nice winner at Gulfstream Park last time out in an allowance race. So let's spin the wheel first. John and Ryan, as always, they're one of the teams wanting to claim, and then Shoddy and Davey. All right, here we go, guys. I'm gonna spin it. Here we go. Let's see who gets him. Is it a prize or not? We'll talk about it later. It's going to be John and Ryan. Of course.
And that's poetic, that Shoddy and Davey don't claim him back. So
yes. Yeah. So, all right, let's recap this. So John and Ryan, I'll announce the claim first. John Ryan will be claiming Praetor. They'll drop Patch Adams. So they will drop Patch Adams, which is their first overall pick. Well, the second overall pick, their first round pick. So let's start. Like you said, with Shoddy and Davey, they actually drafted Praetor and then dropped him and now tried to get him back. Let's start with Praetor. What were your thoughts of the win on Sunday at Gulfstream?
Well, watching it visually, he looked fantastic, visually. Now, as time has gone by, and we were talking about this a little bit last night, right? The speed figure on him came back very slow, and then there was no other time, or distances Sunday at that mile that he ran. So the best thing you can compare it to is that 7-mile claiming race that was earlier in the day, and he ran much slower than they did. On the surface, when he ran, I remember texting you and saying, "Hey, looks like Chad Brown has a Preakness horse, right? This horse is is way late in the game to get into the Derby, but Chad Brown, has this way of getting into the Preakness and doing a fantastic job there." And that was my initial thought. So, I'm kind of sitting here today. I didn't claim him just because, when I looked at a little more data, it looked like it was a slow race, but visually he looked fantastic.
I agree. And you're right. We text right after and we're like, okay, there it is. There's that brown horse we've been waiting for. And like I said, the buyer comes back as a 79. I haven't seen the time form number yet. Not sure about that. But yeah. And then, like you said, you dig into it. And Gulfstream is famous about the race. You really want to compare times on that specific day. They never have another race like it. So you had to do the 7 furlong race, like you said. And it's like when you started comparing it, it's like, ooh, he didn't run very fast in that race. And it obviously was, look, it's his first start of the year. He's going to get better. Second out. Chad Brown, second time starters, when they're 3-year-olds on the Derby trail, they get better. But yeah, it was enough to be like, yeah, I don't think I want to risk it. But I would guess you said it right after Lexington. You think next for this horse to prep for the Preakness?
That makes sense, right? We're 5 weeks out from the Lexington, so if he hits the Lexington, it puts him, right in perfect position for the Preakness. So that's where I would expect to see him next.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, let's go Tampa Bay Derby. We'll talk it real quick, kind of look back. Owen Almighty, the winner. I want to talk about him last. I want to talk about Chad Brown. Let's keep the theme going real quick. With Chancer McPatrick and with Hill Road. We talked about just a second ago, these horses will get better in their second starts. Any interest? They finished second and third here. They kind of closed up nicely. The Gallop Out, they weren't close to winning the race, but the Gallop Out was decent enough to think they might be better, going a little bit longer or maybe just next time out. What were your thoughts on Chancer McPatrick and Hill Road out of the Tampa Bay Derby?
If Brown came out of that race, thinking about those two, he had to be pleased, right? And he's talked all up towards that race Hill Road specifically, that he's just not quite there. And I heard him talking, the day of the race, thinking Chancer was 80% to 90%, right? So
Mhm.
they finished second and third. They galloped out great. Owen Almighty had things up front his own way, and it's going to be tough for closers to ever win a race like that, especially on a speed favoring track like Tampa typically runs. So I think Brown has to be pleased. The real story is going to be coming in what they do next, which is probably the Bluegrass Wood, somewhere on that weekend.
Yeah, yeah. I think, logically, like said, Lexington for Praetor and then Bluegrass Wood for one and Bluegrass Wood for the other, just kind of separating, and it makes sense. And if history's shown us anything, the horse that he's the highest on will be in the Bluegrass, which, you and I have seen live and in person many times. Chad Brown horse run very well there. So change gears down to Owen Almighty. This is what I wanted to ask you, because before the race, they said, his trainer, Owen Almighty's trainer, said, Pat Day Mile is where we're going with this horse. This is a nice setup for the Pat Day Mile. We don't think he's a mile and a quarter horse. Then you win a Derby prep by open links. You don't even have to run again. You're in the Derby. You got the points. We've owned horses, right? So we've never of this caliber, but we've owned horses. What would you do if you were calling the shots with Owen Almighty?
Well, let me start by saying what my thoughts are on him winning the Derby, and I don't think he's going to win the Derby. His pedigree just doesn't say that, right? But I think there's a realistic shot on Derby Day, if he runs in the Derby, that he will hit the top of the stretch in the top 2 or 3 horses.
Yeah.
His running style says that he may be right there, and for a split moment, those owners are going to be the most excited people in the world, and they'll never experience something like that ever again if they don't run the Derby. That's a long-winded way of me saying I would absolutely run in the Derby if my horse qualified.
I've said that, a bit on record of saying that as well. I think even when you you and I have owned horses that aren't great. We've had winners, we've had plenty of winners, and we've had horses that are okay, but never to a stakes level. And you're right. Like, even at that level, you're trying to get to your Derby. Like, for me, it was like, let's try to get to an allowance race at Keeneland. How great would that be? And you're right. Same thing, same type of thing. If my horse turned for home with a chance to win a race at Keeneland, I would be excited, or Oaklawn, or anywhere. So I'm with you. I think I would probably have to do it if I owned Owen Almighty as well. The other thing is, the Pat Day Mile is a big time race, but I don't know that it's that big of a race where it's like, oh, we just can't skip this. You know what I mean? Like, if you were like, okay, I'm going to go to the Breeders' Cup Sprint or the Breeders' Cup, Classic, let's say. Well, the Sprint is pretty prestigious, right?
Yes.
You might want to do that, but the Pat Day Mile, I don't know. Like, it's not that big a deal for me.
Well, and as I look at it, right? So, I mean, my wife and I go, to the Derby every year, and where our box sits, we watch as the parade comes by with the owners and their families, and it's not just the owners of the horses; it's families. There's 20 to 30 people in those groups, and it's not the same experience for the Pat Day Mile. And one other thing I'll add in is, the owners of Owen Almighty own Dutch Brothers Coffee. They're not short on money, right? So this is an experience that they may never be able to replicate if they go to the Kentucky Derby. You only get to run a horse once in it. It's not like he can come back as a 4-year-old and run in it again. You got one shot at it.
Absolutely. And you never know. You never know what could happen, as we've seen. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that's what they're ultimately going to do. I know there's going to be lots of criticism of it. I would just say, you don't own them. And if you were in those shoes, I think you would probably make that same decision.
And as long as they're not compromising the health or the safety of the horse, why not run in it?
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's when I'm with you as well. And I would just tell the rider, look, if he starts to really get tired, just wrap him up, take care of him. Don't push his ass, We got bigger races. We've seen that we can win the kind of these, quote unquote, smaller derbies like Tampa Bay Derby. Like, how good would he look in Oklahoma for the Oklahoma Derby, the Iowa Derby, or things like that, or the sprint races as well? So I'm
Yeah,
with you
he's a
on
very,
that.
very, very nice horse, and I was super, super excited and pleased with his effort in the Tampa Bay Derby, and that horse has earned the right to break from the gate in the Kentucky Derby.
Well, exactly. And because he has the points. I mean, that's a fact. You just stated right there. If you've qualified, you've earned that right. So I'm with you as well on that. We'll see what happens. That'll be interesting. There's always one or two like this every year that it's a tough decision. And, kind of maybe logic a little bit tells you, yeah, maybe he's better suited to win the Pat Day. But that thing of, hey, we could walk over, like you said, with 20 of our friends and family for the Kentucky Derby. We're not going to be able to do that again. So
And one last thing I'll add on Owen Almighty is I can tell you today, if he runs in the Kentucky Derby, he's going to be better than 40 to 50% of that field.
I would have to agree with that. Yeah. And like you said, you turn for home and you're in the lead or you're in second with the thrill of a lifetime right there. And who knows? Maybe you can hold on for a piece of it. He's a quality horse. We know that much. All right.
Yeah.
Let's go to Virginia Derby now real quickly. Well, we don't have to be that quick about it, but a field of 10, we do officially know John Hancock is out. So and that was the worst kept secret ever. I mean, you text me immediately. It's like Mike Smith's not riding John Hancock in the Virginia Derby. Like, yeah. So, but field of 9, who do you like in this race?
For me, it really comes down to two horses, and Getaway Car is the morning line favorite, and probably should be Baffert. He's going to carry a lot of money coming over there, and I think he's going to be running down the stretch, in the lead, and can Rapture come and get him? And I don't think Rapture is going to be setting too far behind him. He sets a little forwardly placed anyway, especially in his last race. So I think it really is a 2-horse race between those two, and you're not going to get 5-1 on Rapture during that race anyway. 2-1, 5-2 is probably the best you're going to get on him that day.
Yeah. It's a really big race for Getaway Car. I think if he can get this one, like, man, that's 2 nice wins. I know they had to go to the smaller tracks to do it, but that's 2 really nice wins. So it's a huge race for him. It's also, I think, in a weird way, obviously it's a huge race for everybody in here, but a horse that's not in here, Caldera. What if Getaway Car wins this pretty easily? What does that say about Caldera and how good of a horse he might be? So, and then what if Getaway Car gets smoked? And then it's like, we may have overrated him a little bit. So I think my racehorse people are going to be watching this race, hoping Getaway Car wins. I like Rapture in here. I'm with you. I think he's going to be more like 2-1. But I do like him a lot. Look, his first race against Vassimo, I thought, and you did too, because you drafted Rapture. I thought he was the better horse. It's just, he just kind of had to overcome a little bit too much. He got too far behind. He made a big move. His Oaklawn win was super nice. And Pratt gets over here to ride. I know there ain't anything else really big going on, but still, I think that's a good enough sign. I like him. I like him quite a bit in the spot.
Yeah. I think the only thing that might, be a little bit of a curveball is it's an odd configuration, right? So it's a 1 1/8 mile 1-turn race, right? Yep. So that might play into Getaway Car's, favor, just because, as we look at him, we've all speculated that he's going to be more challenged as the distance gets longer, but Bob's probably selected the right spot for him to go after a $500,000 purse and more points in a 1 mile, 1 1/8 mile turn race. So
right, 1-turn race. Yeah.
I
thought that might hurt Authentic Gallop. That's a horse I kind of like to maybe hit the board here. But you're right. Once you look at the configuration, it's like, yeah, he probably is a real 2-turn horse. That's why he's been running in 2-turn races. Any other horse you want to talk about?
I think you could probably say the exact same thing for Authentic Promise, right? Or American Promise. I apologize. American Promise, right? He's really a 2-turn horse. And, we've seen a lot of these horses already, Studley Do Right and Omaha racing up in New York and really not making an impact there. And it makes sense for them to come down here. It's not that big of a trip from where they're at. Render Judgment for McPeak. Again, we've seen these horses just not do well so far. on this journey. So if Getaway Car and Rapture are who we think they are, it should be a 2-horse race, and they should be far ahead of these others.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm with you. I think it is a 2-horse race. I would say if anybody other than Getaway Car or Rapture wins, then we can kind of close the book on those two. Because like you said, what if Omaha, Studley Do Right, somebody like that wins? You're going to look up and be like, okay, that was a pretty bad race, because we've seen these horses just not run very well. So okay, last question, and then we'll move on. As far as the Kentucky Derby is concerned, and I'm not saying can any of these horses win it. I'm saying, is there anybody that piques your interest at all? If they win this race, you could exit the race and say, well, I'll think about him on Derby Day.
I would be challenged to say yes, without watching the race, obviously. Now, one of the things I think makes this race difficult to project into the Derby is, what do you do with them next? I mean, there's 7 weeks, right? So do you turn them around and, in 3 weeks in the Bluegrass, Wood, one of those races? Do you wait 7 weeks to run in the Derby, and no horse has even been competitive, let alone win the Derby, off of 6 or 7 week layoff since the early 2000s? I mean, you're 20 plus years. Our friend John White could tell us the exact horse on who that was, but it's an odd spot. And, I think really you're just hoping to get in the Derby with the winner.
It reminds me of the Sunland Derby, how it used to be, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
This used to be Sunland Derby week, and now it's Virginia Derby, and the Sunland Derby's moved to February. It's all changed, but that's how it used to be. You'd get a good horse maybe, but you'd go, well, now what the hell do you do with them? Yeah. And a lot of times they would wheel that Sunland Derby horse back in the Arkansas Derby back when it was 2 weeks later than it is now. So things have really changed. The opportunities aren't there. Maybe a race like the Lexington would make sense for the winner, or even a second place finisher. But I'm with you. It does you're kind of an in-betweener at this point. All right. Last thing we'll cover. Let's go now. And this is what I want to ask you, because we're close enough now where I think I can ask it. Current Kentucky Derby pick, or at least 2 or 3 horses that you are got it narrowed down to at this point.
Well, for me, the top horse is going to be Journalism. One, that race of his, last time out was just ultra impressive. And if McCarthy didn't have him cranked, which logically he didn't, if he didn't have him cranked yet, what's left under the hood for this horse? Wow. And I think, you're going to get a very, very short field in the Santa Anita Derby. But you might be looking at the top 2 horses running against each other in Journalism and Citizen Bull. So how exciting is that 5-horse field if we're lucky to get 5 horses in that race? How exciting is that race going to be? And you got a horse like Beza that looked good in his last one out. Probably is going to be overmatched, but for me, Journalism and Citizen Bull remain at the top. And I'm excited to see some of these Derby preps, right? It's really interesting where these horses are going. So we know John Hancock's going in the Louisiana Derby, right? So what's he going to look like when he stretches out to a mile and 3/16? That's the closest that any of these horses are going to run at that distance until the Derby. What if he goes out there and blitzes the field, right? I think so Journalism, Citizen Bull are at the top of this list, but there are horses that are going to have every opportunity to look really good. Sovereignty coming back in the Florida Derby, and he looked great on his first trip out. So I think this is probably the best top end Derby horse field we've had in a number of years.
I agree. And it's interesting because people I know, because I see comments when I say stuff like, it's like, last year you had Fierceness, you had Sierra Leone, you had Forever Young. It's like, they were good by really the summer, but let's say November. Yes, they were absolutely elite, but going into the Derby, they had a lot of question marks. And Mystic Dan won the Derby because those horses I just listed had a lot of question marks. They weren't exactly stars going into it. They were stars later on. This year, it does feel like we have more horses that are stars right now. And you're right. The headline horses have kind of established themselves. And now it's okay. Now we're going to 1 1/8 or 1 3/16, like you just laid out with the Louisiana race. now let's see if what we kind of expect them to do, they do. Because, for example, like Sovereignty, you expect a huge improvement second out going longer. Let's see if he does it. Barnes, does he get a 1.125 in Arkansas? How does he react when there's a lot of pace in the race with him, like those Arkansas races have had? Journalism, does he improve again? And by the way, if Journalism does improve again, I think it's over at that point, but let's see if he does it, right? So I think you're right about it. Look, I think Journalism, as we sit here March 11th, I think is the play. The one thing I just kind of worry about, he's had some little hiccups here or there. That's number one. That's very worrisome. He doesn't have any right now, but there's been a history of it. I hate that. What is that going to look like when he faces Citizen Bull? I think Barnes is probably Baffert's number one, to be quite honest, as far as other than Cornucopian. I actually think he's number one, but for the Derby right now, I think it's Barnes. But what if Citizen Bull is actually his number one? How will they match up? We think the horse is going to fire better going 1.125 and second out, but will he actually do it? So right now, I think Journalism talent-wise just looks better than everybody else, but I do think we're going to the last preps with a ton of things still need to be answered. I'll say this, and I don't know if you agree with this or not. Since Justify, I haven't been real confident in a Derby pick. I do feel like by the time this thing hits April 13th, whenever the Lexington's done, I'm going to be really confident this year. Do you have that same kind of feeling?
Yeah, because I think you made a really good point about last year, right? So Fierceness, Sierra Leone, Forever Young, they've all come back and just been tremendous horses, right? Sierra Leone wins the Classic. Forever Young looks fantastic. At the Saudi Derby, he's probably going to win the Dubai. Fierceness, hasn't made it back to the races yet. Sierra Leone's supposed to run on Louisiana Derby undercard, right?
Yep.
Those horses have established themselves post Kentucky Derby, and that's why Mystic Dan won it the day that he did, right? So I think that's a great look at those. They're not bad horses; they've become great horses, but on Derby Day they weren't great horses yet. And I think we're looking at potential of at least one in Journalism, and possibly a couple. I'm really excited to see what Sovereignty does in the Florida Derby. When he comes back, I think we might be looking at a couple of really, great horses as they enter the Derby. And I think it's going to make it easier. You don't have to try and figure out what's going to happen, in the race. The Derby is a challenging race, but if you're great, you'll be there at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. You're getting me pumped up for the Derby this year. It is weird.
So excited.
Yeah. Well, some years, every year it's super exciting, right? But some years you do go into it and it's like, from my standpoint, at least, it's like, okay, my business is horse racing, more eyes than ever on the site this day. And I'm not that confident in Fierceness. You know what I mean? I'm not that confident and I had Game Winner back in the day, Tappet Trice. Like I don't have a lot of confidence in these horses. But yeah, when you have a Justify, a Nyquist, an American Pharoah, California Chrome, it definitely makes you feel better. You still may lose, but it makes you feel a little bit better that you've got a horse you really love that you could go talk about.
I'll add one more piece in, especially, for someone like you, whose your business is to pick winners, right? And, these past few years, you've had to eliminate horses and settle on a winner. I think this year you're going to get to pick a winner, right? And even today, we're both on Journalism and makes sense, and I don't expect him to regress. But if Sovereignty goes out and just blows up the Florida Derby, right? You might ultimately settle on him, and you're not settling, right? You're picking him because you think he's the best. And I think, that in this year really is going to add some intrigue to the Derby. I don't expect a 20-1 upset in the Derby this year. It's going to be one of these top 3 or 4 horses that get it done. And it's going to be exciting, over the next month and a half to see how they come back in their final preps. And then, like you said, wrap them up and bubble wrap and get them to the Derby.
Yeah, that's the Dwayne Lucas quote I've loved the most over the years. When he has a good one, he said, "Well, the first thing we're going to do is wrap them up in bubble
Yeah.
wrap for the first Saturday in May." And I think a lot of horses, like I said, right now they're that's the feeling. Just please don't get hurt, please. So
and the Derby has a way of breaking hearts that way.
oh, it sure does. It absolutely does. My dad, the first year really that he was into like on the website, he loved Forte. I mean, he loved him, and all the way up until the week of. He's like, I don't care. They're gonna run him, and he's gonna win. And then he scratches. Like, oh my gosh, he was so sick, and that happens to all of us. So we'll see. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a ton of fun. All right. That's it for this episode. I'm sure we'll be back 2 or 3 more times. Paul, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it. We're going to see you. Okay, so real quick before we go, you're doing the double, the Arkansas Derby, first trip to Oaklawn, and then the Bluegrass, correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right. Are
you
excited for Oaklawn?
I am extremely excited for Oaklawn, and I'm happy that Barnes is coming, right? Because that's going to add a lot of intrigue into Oaklawn. Is it truly Baffert's best horse? Cornucopia, and I think you can kind of set him onto the side. I saw an interview with Baffert yesterday, and that's kind of what he said. He's kind of got him off to the side, and he doesn't want to rush him, which means Baffert is happy with Citizen Bull and Barnes as he heads into the Derby.
Yeah.
So that by not saying much about them, he said a lot about those two. And Barnes, coming to Oaklawn, I think it's going to be a great race, a lot of intrigue. That day, maybe Baffert makes an appearance because it's not the same day as the Santa Anita Derby, so he might be there.
Yep, absolutely. And that would be cool. Every once in a while he'll come to Oaklawn. We'll see if he does. Looking forward to showing you where the racing dudes were born down there at Oaklawn at Hot Springs. I don't know. You'll love it or you'll hate it. We'll see. And then we know what to expect at Keeneland, our tradition, the Bluegrass, and then going into that little room and watching the Santa Anita Derby and the Wood Memorial. So that should be fun. And I think Dubai World Cup's that day this year. Right?
It is that day this year.
Oh my gosh. We're going to have to get to the track at like 8 a.m. to watch these races.
Because you got to do what's that day? Dubai, Santa Anita, the Bluegrass, and the Wood, right? They're all running.
I'm already stressed.
Yeah.
Bring the Woodford or whatever you're going to drink over at like 8 a.m. that day.
It'd be a great way to start the day.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we could talk about that forever. It will be more from us. We'll be live at those 2 races. Should be a lot of fun. All right, guys. We will see you next time. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Everybody have a good rest of your week. Tune into the channel all through the week. We got all kinds of stuff coming on. So, all right, guys, we'll see you next time.